Hello and welcome to another episode of SPMRF podcast. Today we have an extremely noted journalist and researcher with us. Her name is Ms. Venus Upadhayaya, and I know her for quite some time. She is associated with a very well-known New York-based news website newspaper called the Epoch Times, and she has a multitude of areas where she has interest. She is recently has been traveling and working on a specific project in terms of discovering an ancient Shaivite corridor through which a considerable amount of trade used to happen in ancient times. We would have this small discussion with her in terms of understanding the relevance of that corridor, how it signifies India's rediscovery of its civilizational past, and what it can lead to in future in terms of connecting to India's greatness, or spreading the spectrum of India's civilizational ethos. Venus, welcome to this channel, and I give the platform to you. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Patikrit. Thank you for inviting me. So, we are going to delve into the dynamic geography of the Western Himalayan region. And I think before I go into it, I want to briefly explain why I started looking into it. So, my ancestry is from a small village in the Western Himalayan corridor in Jammu. Basically, in the Gulab Singh time or before Gulab Singh time, what was called as the hill kingdoms. So I'm from one of those small regions. When I was growing up, it felt like it was a very remote region. And so my paternal side was from there, and we were living in the Jammu city, in the downtown Jammu. Where you have Gulab Singh's old palatial complex that's called Mubarak Mandi complex. It's on a hillock on the base, on the bank of the river Tavi. And so we were living in this village. And so there was always this curiosity about, my heritage. But it so happened that, I could never come back to my region and I could never discover its history. I had family members who were traveling, who are no longer there, and they always told me that Venus, this is a very special place, but I could never discover it. So in 2020, after Galwan happened, at that time when Galwan happened, I was in Washington, and I was told by my editor that South Asia is becoming a very interesting geopolitical theater, and you should go back to India to report on that. So, though I was there for a 5 year long assignment, I had to cut short that and I had to come back. And that was the first time I started to look at my region from a geopolitical perspective. So, it so happened that if I had to focus on the South Asian corridor, I had to focus on the northern borders, the eastern borders and the western borders. And western border primarily also meant focusing on my own region. Until then, I didn't know that the river, which we were always crossing to go to our village, was a part of the Indus River basin. It's a very important tributary of Indus, and I never knew it. It was just an extremely beautiful valley where my paternal family lived. In fact, they're still living over there. So it is then that one after the other I started to discover things, and there were many people within my own family who had their stories, and the stories were like half known to us because they were orally passed on. There were some important people in our family, and so what I realized that this was a very commutable corridor. People were actually moving from this corridor to other regions, and the stories were very interesting. The stories were not just like haywire stories. There were stories of historical relevance of people from my family. So, like before 1850, there was an ancestor of mine, my great grandfather's father, who traveled from this corridor in the Bilawar region. So Bilawar region is where, recently you had a lot of terrorist attacks in the Kathua region. So, and so in before 1850s, this ancestor of mine, he traveled from this region on a community duty to Haridwar, and on his way back, he was coming through Patiala, and in Patiala, the king was giving a sermon, or king was addressing a gathering or something, and in very dramatic circumstances, a commotion broke out, and this man was a very well-built man. His name was Duryodhan, which is very interesting and strange that somebody would be called Duryodhan. Obviously, he would be well-built like that. And then later on, I discovered how there were warriors in this belt, and from where they came, that's another different story. But Duryodhan got employed in the Patiala army, which was Patiala was a kingdom which from the early 1800s was very much allied with the British. And so his two sons, they grew up there, they studied there. Patiala had the Mohinder Singh College, which was even established before the Lahore University was established. So it had a school of languages, and Mohinder Singh College produced a lot of bureaucrats for many princely states at that point of time. So my great grandfather, he became the first BA of the Kingdom of Jammu and Kashmir, and he got employed in the King's Court. And so he spent most of his life in Kashmir. He was actually appointed in the settlement commissions, probably in the third settlement commission. He was an assistant settlement officer or settlement commissioner or something like that. And he was put on a special duty to codify the customs of Kashmir, which was before the Dogras were trying to bring unified. They were trying to bring a unified civil code, and things like that. So my great grandfather spent most of his time Kashmir, and there are historical records of it that about his work. And Duryodhan spent most of his time from this hilly kingdom in Patiala, and then wherever the Patiala armies were moving, he was moving with them. We had a home in Patiala, but all this while we maintained a home in the hills. So these two stories, like until about 3 years ago, I didn't know anything about them, and so I gradually discovered these stories in detail. And then I realized that my ancestors were actually moving through the length and breadth of this whole corridor, you know, whereas the actual infrastructure, the road infrastructure, started to come to this region only in 1950s, 1952. That is when the first road has come. Obviously, the mule road route was there before also, but it was not like the buses were plying, and so the people were actually commuting, and there was a corridor in this region which I gradually realized was an ancient corridor through which people were passing. And so as I started to delve into it more and more, there were two things that happened. First of all, I discovered the individual stories of a lot of people in my family, in my community, who were important and who have contributed to history, but they were just not known for various reasons. And then second, I understood that these regions, which I grew up thinking that they were very remote regions, they were actually very well connected regions, and people were moving through them. So when I started to trace the civilization routes and I started to travel on them, because every year I go to these regions many times, and I make effort to actually go through these. I have assignments and I work, so I have started to travel to these routes. I started to understand that people who were commuting these through these routes, they were first of all commuting for purpose. So either it was trade, or either it was war, or or pilgrimage. These were three main reasons, and all of these were interlinked, which is very interesting. So, so what my research has now done is I have identified two routes. So I have classified them into route one and route two. And then on these two routes, I have, what to say, identified. I wouldn't say I have identified, because some of the built architectural monuments are already conserved by the ASI. There are other, things. There are other monuments which are not conserved, which are unidentified. So I started to trace all this built architecture on these two routes, and I started to meet people to understand the history, to understand the life, to bring, to document more stories, and then to gradually understand how this important thing worked. So,
Right. So, I would like to ask now, what is the significance of these roots when it comes to ancient India, and how do you connect that? What are the regions with which they were trading, which are beyond India, and how is it relevant in today's era? Where is the connect? If you can explain it to the audience.
yeah. So basically, two routes were there. Okay. So route one, it started from what is today's Basoli. Basoli is a very important point even today. It was earlier also in various periods. So basically, Basoli is a tri junction today. in the political, what to say, political map of India, Basoli is a tri-junction. Basoli is in Kathua. It is on the bank of the river Ravi, where you have the Ranjit Sagar Dam today. So it's a tri-junction between Himachal, Punjab, and Jammu. So the Kathua district of Jammu, the Kangra district of Himachal, and Pathankot of Punjab. So that was the first point. Basoli was a ancient kingdom. Basoli is the place which has recently been also there have been discussions about making it a heritage town, and the recent tunnel that was inaugurated by Prime Minister Modi in Kashmir, the Sonamarg tunnel. There, Gadkari ji, he announced that from Pathankot to Bhadarwa, there will be a four-lane corridor that will be drawn. So that corridor basically is roughly is the same route. What I'm talking about, the route one. So it started from Basoli, I mean, if you start from Pathankot, you will come from Pathankot all the way from Mahanpur to Basoli. And then from Basoli, you will go to Bhadarwa through Bani. So that is even the route today also. But in those days, say until about even 30 years ago, I've met so many people, even in my family, like when women have got married, and suppose they've got married in Bani, they actually had to walk all the way, from this point to this point. And even today, if you are in the town of Bani, there are many small shrines, small and big shrines. Naga shrines are there, Devi shrines are there. Their main destination is Bhadarwa. So Bhadarwa has the nearest glacier in the Western Himalayas. Nearest glacier from say the Indus Plains. By Indus Plains, I mean nearest glacier from Sialkot, nearest glacier from Jammu, nearest glacier from Lahore. The other glacier would be where you have Dharmshala. So if you kind of look at the satellite map, you will see it very clearly. So this route starts from Basoli. Basoli has some ancient temples. Basoli had forts and other things also, but there is a temple which I have studied, which is an ASI conserved monument also. It's called the Trilochan Nath Temple. And so from Trilochan Nath Temple all the way, I have been to Bani. In Bani also, I have marked a 4.5 century old Basuki Nag temple. Then near to that temple, I found another centuries old temple, which is very much similar to Trilochan Nath temple. Now we need to see the images of these temple to really understand how ancient they are. Trilochan Nath temple is about 1,000 years old, and they are basically Shaivite temples. You also find many graves, graves of sadhus and sannyasis in that corridor. Um, Now, the thing is that no particular analysis of this history has been done. So, this route one went all the way from the bank of the river Ravi, from this town of Basoli, all the way to Bhadarwa. And Bhadarwa, because Bhadarwa has the sacred Kailash Kund lake and it has the Vasak Nag temple. The Kailash Kund lake is the ultimate destination. So, like in the central Himalayas, you have Kedarnath, you have Badrinath, or in the Trans Himalayan region, you have the Lake Mansarovar and you have the Kailasha. That kind of a pilgrimage corridor in the Western Himalayas is Bhadarwa. It's locally, that is how it is known. So this was one of the route that led to it. There was another route which led from what is today's border region, somewhere between the town of Kathua and the town of Samba. There is called a place called Dyalachak. So there is a route that used to go from there. It used to come to a point near the village of Bhadu, where there's a confluence of 5 rivers. And that route also went from a different part, from the town of Bilawar. It also went all the way to Bani, and from Bani it went to Bhadarwa. And similarly, like Route 1, Route 2 also has many milestones, which are basically religious milestones, and they are also Shaivite milestones. Route 2 is basically extremely important and largely unidentified.
So what is the purpose of this research for you? I mean, you want the government to promote this whole corridor as a Shaivite corridor, a pilgrimage corridor, so that infrastructure also comes up and people come to know about it? Or does it have a significance beyond pilgrimage or religious tourism? and it also has a relevance in terms of civilizational connect with other parts of the world, or maybe areas which are not geographically part of India today.
Yeah, it has actually all these things together. All these things are interconnected. I won't say that. I think even in the ancient times, it was not just a pilgrimage corridor. Pilgrimage was very important, because what I have learned, and when I have traveled through these corridors, like I've hiked through these corridors, people have told me that so and so king, established this temple, say 400 years ago, 500 years ago, and why he built it on this route, because there were people coming through this route. So people tell, why would somebody build a temple if nobody is coming there? But why were people coming there? And then you start to trace stories. You see, like, I have, I know a family which migrated from the plains to the hills of Bani, say about 150 years ago, and that all for trade. And so they would actually hike with all the goods on mules or on their back, all the way from plains to these hills. I know families who have one home, say, in the Midlands are like with an average altitude of say about 2,000 feet above sea level, and they have an additional home somewhere up in the high hills, say about 4,000 to 5,000 feet above sea level, because they were trading on that route. So, in the ancient times, these routes were commutable for trade, for pilgrimage, and also for war. And what is very interesting is, like, if the king has set up a temple, the temple needs people to do various kind of chores. Like somebody would be beating a drum, somebody would be cleaning the temple. All these people were also utilized by the king in the war and as informants, because otherwise, how would these routes be secured? So the kings secured these routes, by establishing these various religious milestones and then putting his people over there. So when you go on these routes, you actually see that, so and so community, which is linked with the temple, was settled, nearby in this village. And there are many stories which you can find all the way. What is very important is, and what is very interesting is that all this was commutable. There was trade, there was war, there was pilgrimage. Then, gradually, after 1947, our entire comprehension of this corridor changed because of the partition, because of the boundary. Then, our natural and obvious comprehension of this corridor and its geography is more, related to our political geography. We do not actually, the geography is very connected, you know, and all the routes and connectivity is basically about geography. Now, when we talk about civilizational connect, so obviously, there are stories like the local historian Shiv Nirmohi. He believes that 1,000 years ago, when Ghaznavi, he invaded, he started, and Hindu Shahis, they fought with Ghaznavi for some say 25 years, some say 50 years. And then the history suddenly becomes silent about where the Hindu Shahis went. But Nirmohi says that the Hindu Shahis came through this corridor and they settled in four small kingdoms, three of which were in this region that I am, researching on, which is actually the region between Ravi and the river Uj. Uj is a tributary of the river Ravi. So Ravi was also the southern boundary of the kingdom of Jammu and Kashmir. So when 1846, when the Treaty of Amritsar was signed, first certain regions of Himachal were also given to Gulab Singh. But then, the British decided to just give him region to the north of Ravi. So Ravi is that place where I'm saying that the town of Basoli is there. And today, what is happening is, because our concept of secured routes has changed. Secured routes are for us roads, right? But that doesn't mean the geography has gone. Geography is still there. Routes are still there, because routes are basically dry river beds. If you look at the geography, if you look at the satellite map of the Western Shivalik corridor, you will see it, like extremely, what to say, extremely crisscrossed by multiple rivers and streams. And many of these rivers today, they remain dry for most of the year except for during the monsoon season. So now these insecure routes have actually become the conduit for narcotics, for militants. If you kind of go back and look at, you start to trace the recent incidents that happened last year, after June, the many terrorist attacks that have happened, they have actually happened in this corridor only. So
Right.
obviously there was civilizational connectivity. So if Hindu Shahis, if we believe in what Nirmohi says that the Hindu Shahis came, then there was only one route for the Hindu Shahis to come, and that was through Route Two. And Route Two, you would come. There are folklores of other kings from Central Himalayas who have come from the kingdom from the region of Almora to this corridor, and they've also come through Route Two.
So, what do you expect, say, perhaps the government of India or even the J&K government to do with this? Like, once you complete your research, what are your expectations?
See, first of all,
Is it
there is
is
a
it in
lot
terms
of.
is it in terms of you know to understand a part of the historical context which probably has been ignored for a long time, or you have expectations more of to be done with this? Like, for example, these corridors, as you mentioned, have withstood the climatic changes of time, perhaps as well. So, are you
Hmm.
looking at them to be developed as permanent corridors? So, I just want to know what are your expectations once you come up with this report?
See, obviously, there's a lot of historical disconnect. For example, now my research shows that this was a very important, not only just an important Shaivite corridor, it was a very important Lakulisa Pashupata corridor. So, for example, the Panchtithi region on the Route 2, which is the confluence of five rivers, you have an ancient Panchmukha Shivling over there. It hasn't been identified. It's a very, very remote site. Even today, it's a very remote site. It's in the middle of a massive, massive riverbed, which gets very badly flooded. So, if that history is not identified, for example, Lakulisa Pashupata was a very ancient cult of Shaivism. It was present, even before Gorakhnath time. So, a lot of Shaivite cults before Gorakhnath's time, they are no longer existent today. A lot of them merged with the cults which came after Gorakhnath. So Lakulisa Pashupata was a ancient, Shaivite cult which had its origin somewhere in Gujarat. And if you look into like the literature analysis that I have done, Lakulisa Pashupata, Kalamukha, Shaivism, a lot of it is very remote. So, but the sad part is that a lot of heritage that was identified in this region, particularly Velawar, for example, there is a site of Gurnal, a Kashi-like ancient city was being built over there. Even today, there are many multiple springs over there. I have written about it, and one of the springs, which is extremely beautiful, it's a built spring. One historian had gone over there many decades ago, and he said that it's almost about 1600 years old. You know, and so before 1947, the archaeologists of the Kingdom of Jammu and Kashmir, they have studied this region. So there was somebody, a noted archaeologist called Ramchandra Kak. You can find his work in the important libraries, important national libraries. So he has come to this region. He has documented in detail many things. He has documented the things in Gurnal also. This ancient site is called Gurnal. Can you believe? And he has taken pictures, those black and white pictures. Can you believe they don't exist today? You don't know where it went. And the amazingly beautiful temple, where you have three three-faced Bhadramukhas or Maheshamurti, like you have in Ajanta Ellora, you have that Maheshmurti, the three-faced Shiva. You have that over there, and there's not one incident or one story. There are multiple stories which indicate a very unique Shaivite identity, but no focus has been, ever given to it. Researchers haven't worked on it. I mean, I have spent a lot of time in an Oriental library in South to dig into it, and I've even given a presentation. And so there were, differences like how people analyze it. Some can say that even in Shaivism also, it's a very diverse. Shaivism also in itself is very, very diverse. So people can have differences about A would mean this or B would mean this, but people know that this is an important Shaivite corridor. But yet, even today, no analysis of the ASI conserved monument in Bilawar, which is the temple of Vallapur or what is called Bilkeshwar temple, it has been done. There are amazingly beautiful, idols inside it. It's a living monument because people are worshipping, still worshipping it, but no analysis exists. So, first of all, there has to be focus. There has to be historical focus, academic focus. People have to start to study this region. Otherwise, it's like, the otherwise people can say Kashmir Shaivism, but there is a very strong linkage between Kashmir Shaivism and Shaivism in other parts of the country. Like there are researchers who talk about Lakulisa or Kalamukha Shaivism linkage with Kashmir. This appears to be a connectivity between the both. Now why hasn't any focus been given to it? That's first. Second, there's a greater tourism possibility. you know uh, like now, since they are making that 4 lane corridor
Char Dham
connecting.
corridor. You talking about the Char Dham?
No, Char Dham is in central Himalayas, right?
No, no, no.
Char
The
Dham is,
corridor you're talking about.
yeah, that is something which, when this tunnel was inaugurated in
Acha.
Kashmir, there Gadkari ji, he has announced a 4 lane connectivity between Pathankot and Bhadarwah. So they actually want to, if you Google search it, you'll see that they want to make Bhadarwah into a major tourist destination. You know, and just imagine Bhadarwah is almost at the same altitude, the same type like Dharamshala. And this is the region which shares its border with Chamba. But you hear Chamba when it comes to tourism. You don't hear these regions which are just next to Chamba. Why? Why? So why no focus was given to it? You go to these regions, you
So
see.
you also believe that when the invasions happened, do you believe these are the regions which also got impacted in terms of destruction of temples?
See, the local historians don't believe that.
Okay.
They say that all these invaders who came, these regions didn't fall into their route. There's only one local, there's a folklore. There's a place in Bilawar called Babre Danal. So, where locals believe that one contingent of Babur's army, when he moved into India from Afghanistan to India, one contingent moved from this route. So there was a lot of infighting and a lot of bloodshed. So that has kind of remained in the memory of the people over there. That place is called Babre Danal. Other than that, there is no nothing in the memory of the people. But again, that's where the legacy and the heritage of Hindu Shahis come into play. There is nothing about Hindu Shahis in history. Even Kalhana, who's written Raj Tarangini, in Raj Tarangini also he says we don't know what happened with the Hindu Shahis. So the Hindu Shahis, but Nirmohi says that the Hindu Shahis established 4 small kingdoms and they lived with anonymous identity or pseudo identities to escape from further persecution by Ghaznavi. So the 4 kingdoms they established, one was in Bhaddu, one was in Basoli, one was in Bhadarwa, and other was in Kulu, which is in Himachal. And so he has the Vanshabalis of all these people. Interestingly, can you believe in Belawar, these local historians, Dogra historians, they have even documented the Vanshabalis of Sakya rulers, Buddhist Sakya rulers. So again, no analysis exists on it. Just the Vanshavali exists. But why it was there, how it was there, no analysis exists of it. So obviously, the historical disconnect, it's very bad for the identity. Like,
Right.
uh, right. And so the mainstreaming of this region, in the larger Indian context and the evolving Indian context, history plays a very important role. Tourism, obviously. So if all these historical things, they come into the limelight, obviously the Indian tourist will have additional connection with the place. The Bilawar temple of Vasukinath, it is not open throughout the year like Vaishno Devi is open. It's at a much higher altitude. But it is open on certain time of the year like Amarnath is open, so it can be developed as an alternate thing. There is a lot of rich, this entire thing is a very rich biosphere, extremely, what to say, thick deodar forest, extremely beautiful region with lot of water, streams, waterfalls. Um, the cuisine of the region, you have apples and peaches growing in the region. Then why was it not encouraged before? Now there are
So
some.
would you like to show some map or depictions of the places? Do you have it right now?
Yeah, yeah, I have it.
मनुजाम आप थोड़ा शेयर कर दो स्क्रीन वेनस जी के साथ तो शी कैन शो द
मैं
पिक्चर्स.
दिख मैं दिखाती हूँ आपको. Can you see? Is it visible now?
No, no, I can't.
I think that my screen is yet not shared. And so, Pathikrit, you were asking me about what can be done about it. I think
Yeah.
this entire
So
region
I
has,
think what I can understand is that there's a void in terms of historical study of certain places which probably went into the blind spot,
yeah,
and that needs to be brought back into the mainstream of historical discourse. And invariably, if civilizational existence did uh, had had its remnants in those places, invariably there will be other aspects to it in terms of what are the commodities that were
yeah,
traded,
yeah,
what kind of biodiversity it nourished, and why were these roots actually withstood the sands of time, or
hmm,
the weather. So I think and of course the religious relevance or the dharmic relevance of the Shaivite corridor. I think unfortunately, since 1947, as you rightly mentioned, studies, historical studies actually um, went through the places where the roads were built, and
yeah,
probably those places where,
yeah,
well, in fact, I still believe in the foothills of the Himalayas. There are many such places. There are many such
yeah,
mysteries which we
yes,
haven't been able to
yeah.
identify, and they're still considered as some kind of fiction when people talk about Bigfoots on all those things. I don't know, but I'm just wondering that there are such deep forests in many of those regions.
There are,
Perhaps, nobody
and there are
thought
hidden
about
sciences.
understanding. Yeah.
There are hidden sciences, and
Yes, I think that.
people have amazing living heritage. But the thing is, ये जो आज की जो इकोनॉमी है और इस इकोनॉमी का जो लेयर है, until and unless we bring the opportunities of the modern economy to these places, we're going to force migration of people from these regions to other
Absolutely.
regions, right?
Absolutely. And that
Now,
is exactly what happened in the Indo-China borders where
yeah,
migrations used to
exactly. And
happen.
this is also a sensitive region, right?
Yeah.
This is again a sensitive region. This is not like any other part of
So one
India.
thing I would suggest, like the vibrant village model that government of India has been working on in terms of ensuring that migrations do not happen from the Indo-China border regions. They're
Hmm.
creating these vibrant villages over there.
Hmm.
So that can be one of the recommendations as to, the vibrant village model can be incorporated in these so-called areas which have not been identified or not been rediscovered, to ensure
Hmm.
that they remain
That is
people
also
stay
there,
back.
and I have also been thinking about an idea actually that the tri-junctional corridors in India are very unique in terms of their economic viability. Like there are tri-junctional corridors in South. There are tri-junctional corridors between Kerala, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu. Like Coimbatore is one. So Coimbatore is full of educational institutions. Why it is full of
In
educational
fact, that should
institutions?
ideally be your next study in terms of
Yeah, that
all
and
the
that is what I've been
transnational
thinking.
corridors.
I've been thinking that in order to prevent the abuse of civilizational roots further, because these routes have become insecure, these geographical routes have become insecure, can we think of a national education model, which utilizes these civilizational routes? So the national education route, for example, this tri-junction is there. So people from Students from Himachal can come, students from Punjab can come. Pathankot, you just need 45 minutes to reach Mahanpur. You need 1 hour to reach Basoli. There is that, Atal Setu bridge, which connects Pathankot to this. So you can come from there also straight. I wish I would have shown you a picture.
So
And
can you
that,
show it? I think he has shared the screen with you. Just see if you can do it.
just a moment. Can you see now my screen?
I'm afraid not.
Is there something that I need to do to show my screen?
So, anyways, we'll try to incorporate that later. Let's keep it for the
Yeah,
later.
I can give you, because the images are very important. You look at this corridor. The entire corridor that I'm studying is between two rivers, as I said, River Ravi and River Uj. Uj is the tributary of Ravi, and it is also geostrategically very important river, because as per the Indus Water Treaty, India can make dams on the Ravi. So India has already made the Ranjit Sagar Dam, and there is a proposal for dam on Uj. And incidentally, it is at the same spot as the spot of Panchtirthi, where you have the ancient Panchmukha Linga, spot. Again, now, so that's where the concern is. Now, if the dam happens, already there is no identification. Nobody bothers. Nobody goes over there. If one fine day the temple is gone, the entire heritage is gone. Which means the folklore which talks about the connectivity of this region with Almora in central Himalayas, because a king from Almora had come 700 years ago and set up a kingdom here. If this entire spot is gone, we have no way to even talk about it, right? And that is what we are saying. We want, to our identity, the continuity of our history is very important. And then, if we want to find operational meanings of our history, like I'm saying, can we convert the ancient civilizational roots into national education corridors, which means that we set up our educational institutions through these corridors which have natural connectivity.
Right. So, I think these should be very, very prominent recommendations. One in the conclusion of your report, whether it's the national education corridor or the tri-junction model. I think it becomes easier for the policymakers then to actually pursue it in terms of why it is very relevant.
Yeah, exactly. And certain other interesting things are there. In brief, I'll tell you of one thing. So Ramchandra Kak, who was an archaeologist in the J&K kingdom before 1947, he talks of a idol of Garuda and he has put a picture also. It's there in his book. An idol of Garuda that he found in Gurnal. And you know what that idol was called? What Garuda was called in this region? It was called Lonka in the the vernacular. It was called Lonkara Beer. Lonkara is small, Beer is brother. And Lonkara Beer is also a concept which you have in Navratras, when Navratras are celebrated in Jammu region. So if you are worshipping on the 8th day, on the Ashtami, then you have 8 kanyas. If you do it on the 9th day, you have 9 kanyas. And on both the days, you have plus one little boy, who's the Lonkara Beer. So I was, and it has just not been identified. And I was talking about it with people in the South, experts in South, and they were comparing it with the, like either Kartikan or, certain similar characters in South. So when we dig
Right.
into it more and more, we actually can find, many lies. I think that's where some people might be threatened by it, because this can really have the ability to alter major things in history.
No, don't worry about people getting threatened because
And I have
the
to tell
truth
you
has
one
to be
more
told.
thing. So my family, we live in this corridor, but our pandas, that is our spiritual guides or and spiritual religious guides, were Kashmiri Brahmins, from mutton. And many generations of my family was served by many generations of these Kashmiri Brahmins. And they were coming to our village. So I'm told by local people that every summer they would come to this region. Sorry, every winter they would come to this region because winters would be more bearable in these regions. So they would spend like 5 6 months over there, and as the onset of with the onset of summers, they would move back to Kashmir. And this person I have seen, you know. So again, it shows connectivity. It shows missing link in history. It shows interaction between unrelated people, which and those interactions today are extremely politicalized, and that's
True.
because there is a big what to say gap in the historical analysis.
So, on that note, Venus, let's conclude the event of this podcast of today's. And it was fascinating to understand many aspects of history, which probably literally remain in the blind spot, especially the two recommendations that you gave about exploring the trijunctions. And that should be a separate study because such historical, so those trijunctions which had its relevance in the past would always have relevance even now and in future. And they need to be explored and developed, redeveloped rather. Second, the national education corridor. I think that's a wonderful idea, and we look up to this report of yours to come up and with these very prominently written recommendations which can then be worked upon with great value addition to our historical connect and for the future generations. On that note, thank you so much for sparing your time for this small interaction that we had. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Thank you.